Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In this video we're going to be talking about binary plugins and how you can use them with Eclipse or with ESAPI. Alright, so just a general housekeeping note. If you've been following along, you might have noticed, but I can sometimes get lost in my train of thought or distracted. So always remember that you on YouTube you have the ability to change speeds. So if I'm going too slow, feel free to speed it up. I personally like to watch videos on 1.5 or 2x speed, and then I'll slow them down if need to. And then obviously if I am going too fast, or if I go too fast through a specific portion, you can always rewatch it or slow it down. That part is unlikely, but most likely you're going to want to watch these faster. So yeah. All right, and then so for this video we're going to talk about binary plugins, and within the context of ESAPI and Eclipse scripting. ESAPI is short for the Eclipse Scripting API. So within that context, there's two types of plugins that are commonly used in the let's see, let me pull it up. The Eclipse Script Wizard, right? So the Eclipse Script Wizard allows us to create single file plugins, binary plugins, and standalone executable scripts. And this will create the file structure needed, and it will attach like the DLLs and all those things. So this script wizard is actually very useful. And there's other script wizards too, like within like the contouring workspace. Or portal to symmetry workspace. So anyway, the two types, well, the three most commonly, there's also a visual scripting, but we probably won't really get into that. The three that I'll probably cover are the single file plugin, binary plugin, and standalone executable. If you've been following along, then we've created a single file. We used the single file plugin option when we created the conformity check script. And so I'm taking a break, not a break, but I wanted to, we've gotten to a point within that series where we're going to start thinking about using WPF, and a natural segue into introducing WPF applications is using the binary plugin. So we can actually, even though binary plugin, back to this, binary plugin is a class library. So technically speaking, I guess you wouldn't consider that WPF. However, within WPF, you use things like user controls, windows, things like that, and then you can use those inside those views. You have your XML code, and so we can actually add a view into a class library. So that's really nice. The reason that it's a class library is that it's the whole it has to do with it being a plugin. So by plugin, what they mean is that it needs to be run inside of Eclipse, right? And in other words, it's going to, inside of Eclipse, when you run a script, it's going to run its program, and then it's going to call whatever method is inside of your script. So and everything has to be very specifically named and that sort of thing. Like the main entry point into your script has to always be the same. Like for example, with the single file plugin, and I've talked about this many times, but you need a certain namespace, and then you need a you need a script class, and then a script constructor, and then you need a method inside that class that is execute. It's just a public void execute method, and that is the entry point for your code. So that's sort of like a brief general review of what plugins are. So when we see in the script wizard, when we see binary plugin, what it's going to create is a class library. Okay, and class libraries, they need to be built, and when they get built, they're compiled into DLLs, or dynamic link libraries. Okay, and if you watch the if you're new to programming and you haven't watched the intro to a ESAPI video that I've made, I go into a little bit more about what dynamic link libraries are. So in short, it's just a way for us to reference code in another project, basically. Okay, so some pros to binary plugins or class libraries is the main one is that it supports multiple files. And excuse me. So we will see that immediately in just a moment when we create this introductory script or program. And then the cons, they have to be built, which that in and of itself isn't really that big of a deal. But once you've built it and you run it inside of Eclipse, Eclipse captures that DLL, and so you can't rebuild it with the same name. So when you're debugging, it gets really frustrating that you have to change the name of the project every single time you build in order to run it in Eclipse. And then not only that, but then you wind up with tons of copies of your script with just progressively longer names in whatever folder that you have. Now this is true until you log out or switch user. If you're familiar with Eclipse, there's an option up in the you can close all, or you can switch user. So you either log out and then log back in, or you can switch user, and then at that point it will release the DLL. Now if another user has used it, then all bets are off. You have to wait until every single person who has run that script to log off or to release their instance in order for that script, that DLL, to be removed or renamed or rebuilt or anything like that. Now you can rebuild it in another folder. You just can't rebuild it and put it in that original directory. Okay, so that's probably the biggest con that I could think of. And then finally, just an important note is that anything that you're going to run inside of Eclipse needs to be built with the x64 architecture. And I'll show you that here in a minute. Now, the nice thing about using the script wizard, and I'll just go ahead and minimize that. The nice thing about using this is that it does all of that stuff. It sets everything up for you very nicely. So you already have the APIs linked, the DLLs that you need for ESAPI. You already have those references linked and then or connected or whatever, and then you also have it's already set to x64. And then everything's just named properly. All of the entry points they're all named how they need to be. So basically what this is doing is they've created these templates, and it's just it's using that template basically. At least that's my understanding of it. So anyway, so I've named this Intro to Binary Plugins, and I've selected Binary Plugin, and I've selected my directory. So then I'm just gonna click Create, and it's asking if I want to go ahead and open Visual Studio, and I'll say yes. And we'll just minimize this. Let's see. Okay, and let me pull it over. All right, so I'm not going to send this to Git, so I didn't create it in that same directory. I created this in a different one. So I'm not going to worry about creating a Git repository. Well, maybe I could still do that and then just create a new repository for this. I don't know. I'll think about that. Anyway, doesn't matter. Okay, so if you have been following along and you've seen the you watched or you've created a single file plugin, you'll notice nothing really looks that different. Really nothing. It opened a project, and we had references, and we had a single script file, right? So that just looking at this, how we used the single file plugin script before, this doesn't really look that different. And I actually have the other open. Well, I did. Let's see if I can open it. I'll just open it really quickly so you can see. Well, actually, let me just show you Well, yeah, actually I need to show you that anyway. So let me show you the file structure of what was created. And then I'll show you the differences between the other. So, okay. So this text file, that's just the text file that we just had open. So ignore this. What it's done is it's created this plugins directory and this projects directory. So the project, this is the C# project. Okay, and that's what we have open. That's what we see here. That's what that has the references, etc. Okay. But when we save this, you know, if you looked, actually I can just, let's see, let me open up a new one here, and we'll go here. And if I look in this one, so you can see the file structure is very similar, right? But the difference is when you go into this projects, you get this, right? But you don't actually see this CS file. So if I go here, you see how there's the CS file. So this is actually a project file, but in here it doesn't. What this does, the single file plugin, it creates the project for us if we were to, you know, use that script wizard. And what that does is it allows us to have those references so that we gain like the IntelliSense and that sort of thing. But what ultimately happens is that all of our changes get saved in this .cs file. So this .cs file is just it's just a single, it is exactly what it's named, a single file, okay? And then it's a plugin because we put it inside of Eclipse, and then the Eclipse server runs it, or the, you know, the box, if you're on like a clinical box or a research box or something. Okay, so those are some of the differences. And if you notice here, there's nothing here. There won't be anything here until we build. This is the default build directory. And when it builds, it's going to be named, I believe it'll be whatever the project name is, .esapi.dll, okay? And so when you put it into your published scripts folder or whatever, wherever you're running it, when you are running it through Eclipse, it's looking for files that end in .esapi.dll. So you couldn't just name it .dll, at least to my memory. If I'm remembering correctly, you can't just name it DLL and then see it when you go to your scripts folder. Even if you change like whatever directory that you're in, if it only ends in DLL, then I believe that it won't see it. I think it needs the .esapi. Okay, and we can check that. Okay, so that's the file structure. And we can check that if you go to this project tab up at the top, and then at the very bottom it should be the properties for your project. Okay, so just some things to note. If you look up here, this is for your debug mode. It's x64. The option that's probably, like if we were just to create a, you know, whatever application, then it would probably say something like any. It would probably say, I think it says any. So if you're, you know, trying to build and it's complaining, or, you know, just refuses to build, always check this, because if you create something on your own, then chances are you've probably forgotten to change this to x64. And then if you go to this build over on the left menu, you can see the platform target is x64. That's what we want. And then down here, this is the output. This is where it builds to. So you can see it's going to go up 2 folders. That / means up. And then up again into the plugins directory. So if we go back to our folder, we'll see that we were in this projects folder, right? So we go up once, up again, and then into plugins. So that's how we know where it's going to build. Okay. All right. So those are some sort of housekeeping things for this as well. And we can see that the output type is a class library. Now we could change this to Windows application, and then it'd be more like a, or even like a console application, right? But then there's a bunch of things that we would have to change. It looks for different method names and that sort of thing. So we'll just leave it as this for now. So these are some of the and here you see it ends in .ESAPI, so that is true. And the .DLL, that's just the file extension, so that gets added once you build. So I mean, we could just go ahead and build. So let's build it, and let's make sure there's not any complaints. If we go to this output, we'll see, and if you don't see the output at the bottom, then just remember view, and then there should be an output option. Yeah, output right there. Or the shortcut's Control Alt O, looks like. Okay, so anyway, in the output it says 1 succeeded, 0 failed, 0 up to date, 0 skipped. Okay, so I'm gonna close this. All right, and now if we go into our file, whoops, wrong one. Now if we go into this plugin script directory, now we see that some things have been created. Okay, and this .dll, this is what you would copy and paste into your whatever directory that you want to use for running your scripts through Eclipse, whether it's your published scripts folder, or you could just point there's another option in Eclipse where you can point to whatever directory that you want. So like, let's say you want to just keep testing it. You don't want other people to see it, so you just, you point it toward whatever directory that you want. Okay, so now, if you remember, I talked about how, it's looking for certain things. So for these plugins, it's looking for this namespace, vms.tps, and then it's looking for a public class script. Okay, so a class with the name of script, and it has a constructor. It's a blank constructor. I'm not sure if this is actually necessary. I've never deleted it to test, but this may or may not be necessary. I'm not sure. And then, so once you get into the script class, then it's looking for execute. So basically, there's something else where they are. Let's just say void test. And then I'm going to hit Shift Enter to get into there. And like, let's see, this is actually no, we're outside of, let's actually say class. Okay, that should, why is this complaining? Oh, it's not a constructor. There we go. So now if we did a void test method, we'll name these properly, test method. Okay, if we wanted to, something in Eclipse, or like something on the program that runs Eclipse is looking for this script class. So let's say script dot execute. Right, so it's calling this script class dot execute method. That's what I'm guessing. And then it takes a script context. So if we did a private script context, if we just created that and then pass it in, it would be happy now. Well, maybe not. Oh. There. So my guess is that there's something like this going on where they are calling this, and so that way whatever you put in here will get run. Okay, so anyway, that's probably unnecessary to discuss, but just keep that in mind, that these are the things that they're looking for. So if any of this gets changed, then it's not going to want to run, right, for this particular type of plugin. Okay, so we'll see that some things get added here and here, and so if you want to make your script writable, you can. You just need to uncomment this, so you can uncomment with Control KU, or you could just remove the the forward slashes. And then there's some other things that you would need to do as well, but we won't get into that right now. We don't need to make this, we don't need to make it writable for what we're going to do. So, all right, so the script context, this is whatever information comes in from like whatever's open. So like you're going to run the script inside of Eclipse. So if you have a patient open, then now you have the context.patient. Like that will return the patient that's open. If there's not a patient open, then context.patient returns null. And so if you have something that tries to access the patient, like a property of a patient, then or the plan set up, if there's not a plan pulled in or whatever, then your script's gonna crash. And so you want to always like account for stuff like that. So you want to test to make sure that there's something open. And if there's not, then maybe you want to tell the user, hey, make sure you open up a plan. Make sure you open up a plan that has dose or a structure set or whatever. So anyway, so we've gone over things like the fact that it's a class library. So class libraries are used to, most often are used to create like class objects. And then those class objects, they hold, they have properties and then they have behaviors. So maybe you want to create like a method that calculates the R50, right? Which is what we've been discussing in our other set of videos. And we're actually going to begin to do that. We're going to switch over from a single file plugin, start to create a class library project that will allow for multiple files to be created, and then things can be reusable and that sort of thing. So it'll be and we're also going to add an easier window. So when you're using a single file script, you have to define all of your user interface stuff inside that file, and it can be really difficult, and it can get really complicated really fast because you're having to write the logic and create all of the elements like in your code, and you can't see it unless you start to test it. The benefit of this though is that we can actually come in. So if we look right here, there is a window that we have access to. So I'm not going to worry about the environment, but we want to access this window. So it's going to provide a window for us. So the thing about using binary plugins within the context of Eclipse is that you can't create another window. So what you're going to create is you're going to right click your project and select add, and you're going to select user control. But it will allow you to create a user control. So we already have the window, so we don't have to worry about that. So let's just call this main view, okay? And let's just write. So let's do a text block or a text block, and we'll give, and actually we can actually shorten that to just that. And we'll do, this has a text element. And if you remember, we created this, but we created it in the code. And so just as an example, what we did, if you're not familiar, we would create a text block and control dot to get that added. TB equals new text block. And then if we go into there, then we could say text equals my text, right? So this would be a way to manually create one, and then you would say something like window.content equals TB. Oops. Okay, so now this will put this in the content, right? So that would be like one way. And then just in case you're not familiar, in case you've never seen this like this before, another way to write this would be like if I put this here. So I just copied and pasted it. And let's say maybe you've seen it like this, and then you see tv2.text equals my other text, okay? So that would be like a way that you could create manual like elements, like user interface elements. Okay, so that's not what we want to do. What we want to do is we want to use something like, let me pin this and we'll save it. Okay, what we want to use this. We want to use a user control that has a view that has XML, and you can actually see what your thing looks like. Okay, so if we give this a background of white, now we can see what we're doing. Okay, so if we say hello ESAPI, welcome to binary plugins. Okay, so we can see this literally like just populated there. Whereas if we were to do it all here, we can't see what any of that is. So if you watched, it wound up being a very long video. So if you watch that one, I would certainly watch it on like 2x or whatever. But hopefully at least parts of it are helpful. So anyway. So then you have things like, well, now you can control what your stuff looks like, right? So now we could say, oh, and then another thing really quickly, if you hold down Shift and let's see, yeah, if you hold down Shift and scroll, it will go side to side on this. Well, if you have your mouse over here, it'll go left and right. So that's Shift and Control. If I release Shift, then it goes up and down. Okay. Yeah. Let's go back to 200. Okay. So that can actually be really useful. And then Control will zoom out as well. Okay. Or in. Okay. So then we have control of like positioning, right? We could add margin. We could add margin. You see how if we zoom in, it's like right up against it. So we could add margin, and we get all this IntelliSense too. So we could say 40. So now we have this area around there. Well, let's say maybe you wanted a border. So let's say you wanted a border, and then we'll get that. Bring that down here, and then Control KD will also fix all of your things here just like before. So let's do a margin so we can see it, and we'll do a 10. So now we can see the border, and maybe you want rounded edges. Whoops. Let's say 10. Okay. Now we actually don't see it. We see the outline of it, but we haven't given it a radius or a color. So let's give it a radius and see if, let's give it a border thickness of 1. All right. And then let's give it a border brush of gray. Okay. So there. Now we have a border with corner radius. Okay. And then we have a margin inside of that. So maybe if we change this, let's do 20. And let's do 20 here, okay? So now, this is what our view looks like, okay? And then if we wanted to center this, we could say text block, and then let's put that back, okay? Let's do horizontal alignment, center, and now it's in the center, okay? And then if we start adding things, we're in a grid, so we would need to create like rows and columns and that sort of thing, or we could create a stack panel. So that's another thing that we created. If you followed along with the other video, the only thing that's here right now that we didn't create there was a grid. We just didn't need a grid. We just used stack panels. So grids are useful if you want to have like rows and columns and that sort of thing. So you can actually do grid.column definitions. And if you've ever used XML or HTML or something like that, then you're probably familiar with this. And then for this, we can give it a width. We could say, auto. So now whatever's in that first one, it will only take up that much space, or we could give it a star and it'll take up all the space. Okay, so something that you might see is you might see the first one as auto and then the next one as, you know, star. So that way it'll take up the remainder of the space. But the first column would only take up the space that it needs to take up. Okay. And then same thing with rows, but for that you would be controlling the height. So, well, this isn't an intro to XML or anything like that. This is just an intro to some of the things that we can do. So let's say we wanted to get some information from the plan. Okay. I actually hesitate to do that in this video because then it's going to introduce like binding and stuff like that. I'm thinking. I think I want to save that. I don't really want to get into a whole lot of that. I don't know. It wouldn't. We'll just say we'll do one. So let's see. We need a text block and text equals the current plan is, and so you can see like it is basically stacked right on top. Okay. And if it was, like if we did a horizontal of center, it would put it right on top. Okay, and the reason for that is because with a grid, it needs to know where you want it. Okay, so what we could do though is we could add a stack panel. And, okay, so now we have a stack panel, and it has something called an orientation. And its default is vertical. So as you can see, like they're stacked on top of each other. But if you wanted them stacked like left to right, then you would change it to horizontal. Okay, and now you can see they're right next to each other. Okay, and then this is where you would want to add things like margin, that sort of thing. So if we did, and then margin works left, top, right, bottom. So let's say we want 20 to the left, and then we don't need any margin. Okay, so that's how you would add margin, or you could have added the margin on this one to the right to push that over, right? But let's see. Let's just leave it as vertical. So we could either change this to that, or we could just remove it because again, the default is vertical. So let's do, where did we do? Okay, that's in there. So let's do vertical alignment to the center. Let's push that to the center. And then let's add a margin of the top to space that out. And then let's add another text block. Let's add one last text block. And we'll say text is binding. So this is going to be bound to a value inside our view model. And so I'll create that here in just a minute. And this is actually sort of a brief intro into MVC or MVVM. Now we're not going to create the file structure and all that. Like that's how you would do it. But this is how we will develop our user interfaces going forward. We'll use the model view model. I don't know, what is it? Principle or design pattern. I guess it's a principle. I mean, it's a design pattern. So that's what we'll use going forward. And that's a way to separate everything. Okay. Because before, if you followed along with that, we had like buttons, and we created a button, and then we had to subscribe to an event, and all of that code was in the same area, right? And as opposed to this where you would have, we're going to have a file for the view, then we'll have another file for the logic that goes with the view. But you could change that, and as long as you know what properties you're bound to, then you're good to go. So anyway, so we're going to do binding to, we'll say current plan. Okay. And so now let's go back to here. So now we're basically done with this. And let's actually do, let's do that, and let's do another margin of that, just to kind of space it out a little bit. All right, so now we're going to go here. I'm going to close that, and what we need, we've got a main view, and so what we're going to need to go with that is to create a main view model. And so we're going to go to add, and we're going to add a new class, and I'm just going to call this main view model. Okay, so this is the model, the view model that goes with the view, the main view. Okay, and so, and it doesn't know this, it doesn't know that except for the fact that we're going to wire it up here in just a minute. So I'm going to make this public, and that should be well, we're going to need a constructor. So CTOR tab, and we need to bring in, we're going to take that current plan. So we need a plan setup. Okay. And I'll do a control dot, and then it's going to give me that using statement. And we're going to create a prop. I'm actually not sure if we need, did I lose? Okay, there we go. So I'm not sure if we actually need a backing field. I think we, no, I think I feel like we only need it when, we'll test it. So we'll say string current plan, because that's what we named it, and we'll delete all of this and say get set. Okay, and we will say current plan equals plan setup.id. Okay, so super simple. I don't know what's going on there. Let's reopen that. That was weird. Yeah, okay. All right. And okay, so what we're going to do, we already have the window. So eventually we're going to do window dot, well, let's not do that yet. Let's do, we're going to create a main view. So main view MV, well, we'll type it out, but you could very easily just do MV for main view. And I'm going to do control dot because it's complaining. And the reason it's complaining is because it doesn't know where to look for that main view. And it lives in this. So it lives in this project, or I guess in this namespace. So let's see. Namespace, yeah. Intro to binary plugins.mainView. So it needs that in order to access this, because if we hover over it, it says intro to binary plugins.mainView, right? Okay, so main view equals new main view. And I'm going to go ahead and we need to set something called the data context so that it knows where the data for the view comes from. And then for that, we need to create a new instance of our main view model, because that's where we want the logic to come from. So we're going to say new main view model, And if we see it's complaining, and if we hover over it, says that that it needs a plan setup. Okay, so all we're going to do is do context.plan setup, and now it's happy. And then we need to close that off with that. And then what we're going to do is set the window content to the main view. Okay, and I don't believe we need a window.show. I don't think we'll need that until we have like an application, like a standalone, something that's like a standalone application. So I think we just need to set the content, and then Eclipse will take care of the rest for us. Okay, so let's see. So we are creating an instance of our view, our main view, and then we're setting that data context to that, and then we're passing in the plan setup. And then once this, so if we go over to our main view model, what this is a constructor, okay? And so what happens is anything inside of this gets run every single time that this instance is created, okay? So whenever this method or whatever this constructor is run, whenever an instance is created, then this logic gets run. Okay, so what will be interesting is to figure out whether or not the view will know that this has been set, that this has changed or been set, this value, the current plan value, without us notifying it. And so if this doesn't get automatically populated, then we're going to go down a short, well, it's not really that short, but it's not that complicated either. I mean, it is if this is new to you, then it is. And I'll have to we'll have to do some Googling and stuff just to get the exact code. Because eventually we'll have a NuGet package that we'll use called Prism that will handle a lot of that stuff for us. But anyway, so hopefully this will work without that. Okay, so we want to build it. So we're going to build. All right, and I'm going to pause really quickly just to make sure I have Eclipse open, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so I've logged into Eclipse, and I've set the folder to the directory in which this gets built, this plugins directory. Okay, and so now we can see our file, and let's just see if it works. Ooh, no, this is the original one. Oh, you know what? So this was actually a test that I had done earlier. So let's actually, I just wanted to make sure that the Eclipse would work with it. So let's see, it's in here. Okay, so yeah, so this is the intro to binary. The other one was actually for WPF. So that was another example. But yeah, so this is for intro to binary plugins, and so let's try running it. And we get it, and it works. So the current plan is long SBRT, and if we look over here, it says long SBRT. Okay. All right, I'm so glad that we didn't have to go down that rabbit hole. So then when you get into your let's see, if we're looking at our, okay, so we're setting the window content. I don't know if you noticed, but the window was huge and our content only took up a small amount of space. But if we look at our view here, it's like, it doesn't really look like it's that big. I don't think it would have been as big as this. Like if we look at this, we zoom in, I don't know. Yeah, I don't think it looked that big. like the font looked that big. So I feel like the window is taking up more. It's the window is larger than it needs to be, probably, because we've not set like what the height and width are. So we could do that, or we could just let it do its thing and then just make sure that our view fits inside of whatever size window there is. Or we could set the window height and width so that way we know exactly what it's going to be. And we could say, here we could do window dot height. Whoop. Good grief. Oh gosh, I can't. No wonder. Equals, we could do, I don't know, 800 or whatever. And then we could do the same for the width. Okay. Maybe this is like 1200 or 1100. And then maybe the height is, I don't know, 900, something like that. Anyway, it doesn't matter. You can figure that out. But yeah, so this is just a basic intro. And so that is how you would wire up a view and a view model to go with your window. And what this does, just to recap, what this does is it prevents you from having to create your window elements in your code. So it kind of, it decouples it, right? So it's no longer, they're no longer completely, they're still relying on each other, don't get me wrong. So like if you change one, it will change the other, right? So we still have some issues there. Like it's still not perfect, right? But if you wanted to change your view, you don't necessarily have to change this, right? Unless you start changing like what you need, what you want in your view. So, or in your view model. So, and in your view, right? Whoops. So like if we started adding other things that didn't have to do with the plan setup, then we would need to provide those to the view model via here. Okay. So like maybe you want the patient, which you could get that from the plan setup. I believe the plan setup actually has a patient property. No, it doesn't. Okay, yeah. Maybe it's, you know what, I'm thinking of the database, like the ARIA production database. And I think it may not be plan setup, but plan setup has a course and the course has a patient. So at least from memory, I could be wrong, but anyway, so the more stuff that you want in your view model, and coincidentally in your view, the more things you may need to provide to your, to your main view model. Okay. Really, and if you wanted to, you could just do a context, right? Because then you'd have everything. But the thing is, like, you don't need everything, right? You just need certain things. And then, like, this is your main view. And then what happens is eventually you start to create more modular design where instead of, instead of creating all of your view inside of this, you have like a toolbar view. And then you have your logic that goes with your toolbar. Or maybe you have a DVH view or a fields view. Right? So then now you're starting to separate your logic into these modular parts. So that way, when you do another script and you're like, oh, you know what? It'd be cool to display the field information here. And I'm probably still going to use a table. So I could probably at least start with the project that I used before. So then what you could do is you could go to add and then an existing item. So now you could add an existing view and an existing view model, and then you would have to wire it up so that it has what it needs, and fix all the parts that are complaining and change the namespaces and stuff like that. But it's just an example of something that you could do. And then if let's say you had another project and it was a class library, a lot of times what you'll see with like WPF applications is you'll see the WPF project coupled with a class library. And then what happens is you write all your logic there. Well, not all of it, but you write a lot of your like classes and behaviors and things like that. So like, let's say for whatever reason for that project you needed to create, like for example, the conformity index, right? So we needed we need a conformity index class to help us create or to calculate the R50 ranges, like the ideal ranges, right? And so we're going to create a class. So let's say we did that in our project. Well, if we wanted to reuse it, we'd have to go in, copy our code, all that stuff. But if we put it into a class library, then when we build, it builds that into a DLL. And then all we have to do is we just go to, in another project, we can go add reference, browse, find it, add it, and then we're good to go. Now we have access to that code, right? So I'm not starting to ramble. I've been rambling, so you'll have to forgive me. But if you're still hanging in there, I do appreciate it. And I think with that, we'll end there. But yeah, so I appreciate your time, and I hope that it's been helpful, at least to some degree. And if you have any comments or questions, just leave them below. And if you would like to follow along, then be sure to like and subscribe. And until then, I hope y'all have a great day.